Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Deadlock, which is episode 21 of season 2 of Star Trek Voyager. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes as determined by my Patreon user polls. My latest Patreon user poll ended in a tie between Preemptive Strike, the Star Trek Next Generation episode, and this episode, Deadlock. And that was a tough decision because I love both episodes for which one I want to cover. However, I recently did a video with Wes over in the Penske File over on his channel where we talked about Preemptive Strike, and I watched the episode for that, so I kind of wanted to do something else this time, so I chose to review Deadlock, but both of these episodes are amongst my favorite and also underrated episodes. So Deadlock is the episode where Voyager is duplicated and there ends up being two crews, but they're sharing one source of antimatter, so one ship becomes completely damaged while the other one tries to repair itself before they realize that they've been duplicated. Once they've been duplicated, they try to work together to find a solution, and the damaged Voyager Janeway decides that she's going to self-destruct her ship so that the other Voyager can survive. However, the Vidians then show up and they only see the Voyager that's not damaged, and they invade that ship and begin killing everyone and removing their organs. So that Janeway decides to blow up her ship, leaving the other Voyager to survive. So I've always loved this episode. Every time I watch it, I really enjoy it. Like, I never get sick of it. And it's always been a favorite of mine. And in fact, this is what I think about when I think of season 2 of Voyager. And I said before how I love season 2 of Voyager. And almost everyone else I know says that season 2 of Voyager is one of the worst seasons and they hate it, because I think when they think of season 2 of Voyager, they're thinking of Threshold, they're thinking of like Neelix being jealous and attacking Tom Paris, they're thinking of Neelix doing a morning show or stuff like that. But that's not what I think of when I think of season 2. I think of episodes like this one, and there are also other good episodes. Like, it had a really great romance story with the Doctor. They had a really good story of Seska. Sesko's an amazing villain. She mainly shined in season 2, and I don't know, there's just a lot of good stuff in, like, the clown terrorizing the crew. Like, there's a lot of good season 2 episodes. So I don't know. In my opinion, people just tend to focus on the negatives of season 2, and I think the positives outshine the negatives, in my opinion. But mainly just because I love them so much, and for me, this is a prime example. This is my favorite episode of season 2. This is what I wish Voyager remained like this. I think Voyager lost this feeling of excellence. That in later seasons that didn't have it, and which is why I love going back to season 2, which is why I love going back. I honestly, even though there were some great episodes in the later seasons, I honestly think they could not get back to how great this was. And now, as I said, this episode is underrated. A lot of people don't like this episode. I once watched a review where the reviewer really didn't like this episode, and they were just ranting about how junk the science is and how it doesn't make any sense and how ridiculous and unscientifically accurate this episode is. And when I think about that, who cares? That's what I think about that. I mean, this is Star Trek, for God's sake. Star Trek has never been one to be... if you're looking for science accuracy in Star Trek, you've come to the wrong place. Like, Star Trek has never been one about scientific accuracy. Now, That being said, everyone has their threshold about how ridiculous you can get with science before you're like, all right, this is just nonsense. For example, my threshold's around, well, threshold's a good word for it. that's a good example. But actually, the other example I was going to give was Abraham Lincoln floating in space. Like, yeah, that's too much. Or like a giant hand reaching out and grabbing the Enterprise. Like, no, that's so. In other words, the original series is like way worse. Um, but like, so I understand that. So everyone, even myself, can think that the if you go too like fantastical, unscientifically accurate, it can get ridiculous. But this episode does not at all cross that line for me. And the main part is that it's awesome. It's so good. If they bend scientific accuracy to tell us a great story, I don't care. Um, so yeah, so for me, why do I love this episode so much? Because it's really is one of the most high octane, like suspenseful episodes, but while presenting a really unique and interesting scenario at the same time. I mean, we've seen other doubles in Star Trek before. We've seen clones. We see Kirk get ripped in half by a transporter accident, or Riker being doubled by a transporter accident. We've seen parallel universes, alternate realities. To me, this is the most interesting and unique concept of having like a double. Is that that's just because they entered some rift or something, and the ship is literally doubled, but it's like Siamese twins where they're like sharing the same antimatter, but there's two different versions, so the people were exactly the same up to this point. And so, to me, that's more interesting than having like a mirror universe where it's the exact same crew, but they're evil. But here, it's they're exactly the same. Really, they're just exactly the same until like 5 minutes ago when they started to diverge with their different experiences. And I love how I think this episode's very expertly written, expertly directed, the way that they slowly disseminate this information where you're not aware of course. I love how you're at first you just follow the damaged Voyager, how they're getting like damage and destruction, the ships like being destroyed. They want to activate these proton bursts or whatever to fix the ship, but then all these proton bursts come out of nowhere and start destroying the ship, and they don't know where these proton bursts are coming from. And then you see all this destruction around the ship. You see Hogan get knocked on his ass and blown out, and then you see Harry Kim dies. I remember watching this when Harry Kim was like, being sucked out into space, and I was like, oh yeah, he's gonna be saved. B'Elanna's gonna grab him. He's the main character. He can't die. And then he just floats away and floats off into space. I was like, what? They just killed Harry Kim. What the hell? And so it intrigued me, and the baby that was being born, like this was hinted at earlier in season 2. Again, and I've talked about season 1 and 2. It has this sense of community, this sense of continuity that later seasons lost. Like, I love how at the start of the episode when they're Ensign Wildman's giving birth, like the whole crew is like, this is kind of our baby. It has that feeling of family, that feeling of community that they just blew out the freaking window to make the Doctor in 709 show in the later seasons, which is why I prefer the earlier seasons. And then the baby died. Very tragically. So this really grabbed my attention. And I think that's another reason why I love this episode so much, is because it should be noted, some of my other favorite episodes of Star Trek are Year of Hell and Damage over on Enterprise, where we see like the ship get completely fucked and the crew start to die and stuff like that. I just find this apocalyptic kind of storytelling very interesting, because it brings out, like, it shows the characters how they would deal with this situation, and plus it really raises the stakes, in my opinion. So seeing all of this damage done to Voyager were to continually get screwed. Harry Kim dies, the baby dies, the ship is in shambles, the bridge is destroyed, and they had to evacuate and get engineering. And then all of a sudden, you see a different version of Voyager that's perfectly fine. Everyone's okay, and they have no idea what is going on. And I love that. I love that's how they reveal their two Voyagers. I love it's really great storytelling. They could have like showed you at the start. They could have intercut between the two, but no. I love how they just stuck with the damage one until all of a sudden, bam, you're on the pristine Voyager. After seeing Voyager in shambles, all of a sudden, everyone's fine and everything's okay. No, the baby's born and there was no complication. Harry Kim is alive and well on the bridge. And I love that reveal, that twist. It's done so well. But then, so then you carry on more and you get the interactions between the two different Janeways interacting with each other, trying to figure out what's the best way to handle this. And again, that is absolutely amazing. I think this is like one of the best explorations of Janeway's character, to have her actually interact with each other and have two different Janeways like standing there talking next to each other, and like they kind of know what the other one's gonna say because they're the same person. And I love how, you know, the Janeway from the damaged ship was like, I'm gonna destroy Voyager, and the other one's like, no, you know. She figures it out before she even says it. It's like, you're going to self-destruct your ship because I know you, because you're me. and then she's like, well, I'm glad we agree. He's like, I didn't say I agree. I said that I understood. And that's just amazing. That's like, in the way it was done, the way it was acted, the way it was written, it was just so interesting. I can't believe people will get mad to be stuck on the science part of it. Who cares? Like, the character stories in this are just so damn good. But you know, it gets even better because then again, satisfying my hunger for apocalyptic and the crew to be killed. It turns out that the Voyager that's completely damaged and that's completely fucked ends up being the one that survives because the Vidians show up. And I love the Vidians. They're definitely the most interesting alien foe that they had in the first two seasons. And the Vidians show up and you see them invade the pristine Voyager, and they can't even detect the damaged Voyager, and they just slowly invade and start like running down the ship and just killing the crew and stealing their organs. Like, I always get goosebumps watching these scenes. Particularly, I love the music that they use during these scenes as well. It really, no matter how many times I see this episode, it gives me goosebumps. It really gets my blood pumping to see like Tom Paris like running down the corridor, shooting behind him, and the Vidians shooting back, and eventually the Vidians shoot him and like rip out his organs. Like that is such amazing stuff. But then, of course, the Janeway decides that, you know, she's going to self-destruct her ship in order to destroy the Vidian so that the other Voyager can survive. But as a consolation, they're going to have Harry Kim go over with the baby over to the other ship to make up for the fact that Harry Kim and the baby died on that Voyager. And I love seeing Harry Kim go to sickbay and save the baby, and he does this little flip move. Now, I was just reading behind the scenes, and apparently that little flip that Harry Kim does was Garrett Wong's idea, because apparently the actor had done some combat acting training, and so it wasn't actually scripted. He was like, apparently he went to the director, hey, let me try something. So he did this little flip, and everyone was like, yeah, that's great, do that. And so that was kind of improvised by the actor on the spot. And it does make me wonder, though, why Tuvok was killed so easily by the Vidians, yet Harry Kim gets to do this cool little flip. But you know, Harry Kim is so shortchanged and so underutilized in the later seasons. I'm okay with this. That they make him the badass of the episode. And then he saves the baby and goes over to the other Voyager. And, God, one of my favorite moments, it's up there with Janeway saying time's up in Year of Hell. One of my favorite moments is when the Vidians make it to the bridge, because Janeway set the self-destruct in motion, but she muted it so no one could hear it. And then the Vidians get there, and she's just very, very graciously, like very calmly, is like, welcome to the bridge, and even gives this like little bow, and the Vidians kind of bow in return, and then they look over and see that the self-destruct is about to go off, and the whole ship just destroys them, kills them all, and like, destroys their ship. Like, what a badass moment. That is one of the best badass moments. Like that one and the Time's Up one and two of my favorite like badass moments in all of Star Trek, and they both get a Janeway. Yeah, it's absolutely. Oh, then there's also counterpoint. Janeway has a badass moment there. So Janeway has some of the best badass moments, I gotta say, and this is definitely one of them. I fucking love it. And then the ship blows up, and the Vidians blow up, and then so this reminds me a bit of the Deep Space Nine episode Visionary, and I think I talked about this episode when I did my review for Visionary, how you have a different version of O'Brien who comes back and survives and moves forward, where here, to me, this is the classic example. You have a different version of Harry Kim and Naomi Wildman, although they didn't name her Naomi in this episode. We find out her name later on in season 4, but that's who it is. That they actually come from a slightly different Voyager, and Kim tries to talk to Janeway about that. She's like, I feel out of place. Like, this isn't really my Voyager, but it is my Voyager. You're not really my captain, but you are my captain. And isn't that a little weird? And Janeway's like, this is Starfleet. Weird's just part of the job. And if you've seen any episode of Star Trek, especially in the original series, you know that's absolutely true. That is absolutely true. That is absolutely the case. Being weird is part of being in Starfleet, and I love how they just use that to dismiss it. You know what? I don't even mind that they never brought this up again. I actually think, because usually I complain when something significant happens and they don't bring it up again, the lack of continuity. But in this case, I think it's kind of cool that they just move on from this. Weird's part of the job, and just ignore it. And going forward, it's just Harry Kim. But then you have that as an audience member, you have that knowledge that this is like a slightly different version of Harry Kim, yet it's still Harry Kim. And I absolutely love that. And of course, Naomi Wildman as well was slightly different. So it's really cool, really suspenseful. And so this episode's not really deep in a way that some of my other favorite Star Trek episodes are, where I can analyze and talk about the deeper meanings behind it. This is pretty like surface level, on the nose, so there's not much more I have to say about this episode except that it's amazing, and I never get sick of watching it. I think it's definitely one of the most suspenseful, one of the most interesting episodes there is. Now, other things I will have to say is, apparently a lot of people involved in this episode really like it as well. Brennan Braga was really fond of this episode. Robert Beltran, who plays Chakotay, who complained about a lot of the later seasons, and in fact, listening to his complaints more specifically, I completely agree with him. Like, for example, he hates the finale in Game, and if you know me, I absolutely do as well. And but he liked this episode. Robert Duncan McNeil plays Tom Paris. I also love this episode. The guy who played Hogan, who only had a brief appearance in this episode, this was his most memorable episode. He loved it. Now, Harry Kim, Garrett Wong, who plays Harry Kim, didn't specifically say he liked this episode, but he said that his favorite stunt was in this episode when he did that little flip. And I agree with him there, because they actually give Harry Kim a chance to shine, which again, as I said in later seasons, they don't. They kind of screwed the pooch with this one. So, I disagree with those who think this is just a mediocre episode. I think it's underrated in that case. It's more underrated than a mediocre episode. This is a standout episode. Oh, and of course I disagree with those who think this episode sucks because science, whatever. Aren't you familiar with Star Trek? Come on. Anyway, scientifically accurate. Yeah, right. Like Star Trek ever does that. So no. I think this episode is absolutely amazing. So my rating for Deadlock out of 10 is a 10 the best. Yeah, one of the best episodes. If you watch my Voyager countdown, this is my second favorite episode in all of Voyager, and I absolutely stand by this. It never gets old. Watching again is such a well constructed, well written episode. The way they disseminate information really adds to the confusion, to the high octane, to the reveal that they're two different Voyagers, and it's so interesting. It reveals a lot about the characters, seeing two different Janeways interacting with each other, having Harry Kim from the Doom Voyager join the other Voyager is very fascinating. It reveals that. And then I didn't even talk about the Doctor, about how he saved Naomi Wildman's life. He showed heroics. The Doctor got destroyed, and how the other Doctor, when he heard about it, was like, "Oh yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm programmed to be heroic." Amazing. And the way it was so dark at the beginning, when you see the baby die and Harry Kim die, it's and then it gets darker when the Vidians invade, but then it has this really happy ending. I don't know. To me, this is almost like a perfect episode of Voyager. I do wish that, and that's why I don't like the later seasons. I look at episodes like this and this is what the later seasons lack. Even the good episodes of the later seasons are not as exciting, not as character driven as this, and it's missing. So I love this episode. I love season 2. And I'm not going to let anyone tell me otherwise. So anyway, that is it for my review of Deadlock. Thanks so much for watching, and thanks for all the patrons who support my channel and voted for this episode, or at least participated in the polls. Your support is very much appreciated. And of course, if you would like to support me on Patreon, there are links in the description below. Even a $1 a month will get you access to videos like this 2 months in advance before anyone else gets to see it. And you get to vote in the polls and all this other stuff. So anyway, thanks everyone for watching. Be sure to check out my channel, as I cover all things Star Trek, many more Star Trek stuff, and many other shows like The Expanse, Star Wars, and whatnot. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that. And thanks a lot for watching.